WFAN.
All right, it is time for the Centric Health segment. We got Dr. Bridge Bomby. He comes on every Friday to walk us through some of the complexities, particularly of this pandemic we've been in. Going to tap into his knowledge, see where does he think we're going. Dr. Bomby, welcome back to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, Richard. How are you?
I'm doing terrific. I got to tell you, last week we started off this segment. I was telling you I'm feeling better. Well, I'm feeling a lot better right now, at least. I talked to my previous guest. He works at Garces Memorial High School. We've got activities up there. Kids are going back to school. It's opening day for the Dodgers. They have limited seating down there. It's hard to be anywhere in this country now and not feel some sense of we're going back, but there's still dangers out there. Can you talk to me about how can we screw this up?
That's a very good question, Richard. The answer is hopefully not. But does that possibility exist? It definitely does. So just let's look at what happened in the last few days. The news of the day was the J&J vaccine also elicited some of the clotting problems that were previously associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. And the concern there is that both the technologies are using a dead virus, which is a adenovirus, as a vector to deliver the protein in the case of AstraZeneca and the DNA material in case of Johnson & Johnson. So is there a common pathway related to the dead adenovirus that's stimulating the clotting disorder? So that's provoking some thought process across the pond in the European Union especially. Mm-hmm. The funny thing is with the AstraZeneca vaccine, there has been a mismatch of side effects. In Norway, they had 5 cases out of 120,000. In Germany, they had 27 out of 2.3 million, and much smaller numbers in England. So what it's translating down to is there could be a potential relationship, but overall the incidence is still well within the statistical probabilities. But there has been a heightened awareness that there may be a link with the common technology. And for that reason, and because the clustering is happening in women in their younger days, so they are saying limit the use to vaccine after 35 years of age in Europe, and in France they're saying after 55. But to answer your concern about the complacency and the possible elimination of the virus, we need to take a little pause there, because in Canada, the infections are surging. In the U.S., infections have plateaued at a much higher level. In EU, there is Germany is thinking of lockdown. Denmark is beginning to think of coming out of lockdown. And there's a talk about lost second summer in Europe. And that's a huge deal because their economies really depend on tourism. And that's going to be a setback. Similarly, in India and Brazil, there's a huge surge coming up. So anytime, as we discussed repeatedly before, anytime a virus has a receptive host, it has possibilities. And those possibilities can work against us. So yes, do I share the positive news? I do, but we shouldn't let go our guard because there are too many slips between between the cup and the lips going forward.
Right. What is it? Why? This is what I don't understand. Maybe you can help me walk through this. Why is it that this whole time with this pandemic seems to be marked by cyclical events? The virus rages, then it starts to get under control. And it seems to go, particularly in Europe, if I can use them as an example, from country to country. Spain is good one, then 3 months later, Spain is in trouble. What is it about Europe? You're talking about a second summer of lockdowns. What are they doing? or what? Maybe the better question is, what are we doing that they're not doing, or is this just a matter of luck? I mean, why are they having such a hard time where it seems like we're doing better here?
I think it's a behavior-related thing. We know what the virus does. It has a 2-week cycle, and when there is a relative security, complacency kicks in, and the combination of the complacency and the coexistence of the virus lends to higher infections. Higher infections compel better compliance, and thus up and down it goes till the time there is a substantial amount of immunity through either infection or through vaccination. And it's going to continue to occur because the cumulative susceptibility in Europe is still 70% plus. The cumulative susceptibility in our country, hopefully, is closer to 40 or 50 or 60% lower than Europe. So they have, and if you take it to China, for instance, they really have a huge susceptibility because they never really suffered huge waves. Their only protection has been to keeping the virus out. If the virus goes in, then they have vaccination process which is way behind where we are. So if you look across the world, Israel is number 1, in UK number 2, and we are close number 3. And Europe is way behind us. So the Europe has only depended on natural infection-acquired immunity. They haven't vaccinated much at all for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. I had read about the European Union, and it's under a lot of criticism for kind of falling behind and not putting in its orders for vaccines and those type of things. Dr. Bombi, it seems to me that where we are right now is a really dangerous spot because as we get closer, as we inch closer to potential herd immunity, you have people whose behavior is going to start reverting back. They've had their shots. They're anxious to get out. They want to get out. They want to see people. They want to travel. You see this in the airline travel too. So it seems to me that we're at a pretty important spot here. But I don't know how you avoid once you get 20 million people in California vaccinated. Well, they're going to start to act different, and it calls into the question of what can we do once we're vaccinated, and what's the prudent thing to do? Could you give me some tips on, for example, if I'm fully vaccinated, I feel like I should be able to go to a Dodger game or something. Now, but then you see the pictures of these huge, particularly on young people, these, as you said, the roaring 20s are acting like these spring breaks and crowds. What's the danger here as we get closer to where we want to get, but at the same time we let down our guard, so to speak?
By definition, Richard, the people who are vaccinated should be protected. The only concern is their potential likelihood of having asymptomatic infection and there being vectors in infecting other vulnerables. But the people who are vaccinated essentially should be liberated, and they can go to pre-COVID activity era, except that the people who are not vaccinated or have significant vaccine hesitancy are the ones who will continue to be potential hosts for the virus and maintain, as we discussed, clusters of susceptibility where the virus will have an open field. And the vaccine hesitancy is becoming the major problem in our country. I was looking at Mississippi numbers. They have a glut of vaccine, not people lining up to get the vaccine. So that's going to create a problem, and it's an amazing thing, this vaccine hesitancy and the vaccine passports we talked about. There's a convergence of different constituencies. You have conservatives on one side who are saying it's an infringement of their individual rights.
Right.
You have liberals saying, oh, it creates further inequities. You can't have vaccine passports. And then you have libertarians like Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, who says it's a vaccine fascism. It's amazing to me how totally different ideologies converge on vaccine hesitancy. And then you have young Republican men, which are 40% of the whole Republican Party, who are adamantly opposed to it. So there are political divides, there are ideological divides, there are philosophical divides. My concern isn't the vaccinated. My concern, Richard, is the people who refuse vaccination and thus create a gap in our societal ability to achieve community immunity.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the people who, for whatever reasons, political or whatever reasons, just say, I'm not going to do it. You hear that all the time. You hear people say, well, they developed it too fast, and you just can't rely on science because science has been wrong before, right? So what happens is there still a danger? Can you reach herd immunity if 30% of the people don't take the vaccine?
So that's a $64,000 question there. Nobody knows the answer to. But what we know is what is in the play. In the play is the vaccine, which is 95% effective. In the play is a virus which is extremely contagious and is having iterations which are getting more contagious. So the higher the efficacy of the vaccine, more likely the number needed to reach herd immunity is lower. More contagious the virus, higher the likelihood that number needed to achieve herd immunity is higher. So that's a dynamic we haven't resolved yet. But we have to basically approach it from a point of caution. We can't be lackadaisical about it. We need to make sure the more people get vaccination, better we are as a country. And Richard, lately I've been, it's a constant conversation in my office to encourage people to get vaccinated. And I'm encountering hostility. The people who are adamantly opposed to vaccination, they're also adamantly opposed to even having a word about it. So it's like, shut up and move
interesting.
on. That's not a topic for conversation.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, along those lines, you have spoken eloquently about the need. We got to get the entire world vaccinated, because if we don't, then you're going to have these kind of breeding grounds where mutant variants of the viruses are going to grow. If you had, is it possible that you could have a country or an area that had reached herd immunity, but in another part of the world a variant would be developed that could be spread to that country with herd immunity, and then we'd have to start all over again because the existing vaccines wouldn't treat it?
That's exactly the concern, that the immunity that has been achieved either through the infection or through the vaccination may be confined to that variant, the one that the vaccine was developed against. So if you have a sufficient, that's what we call antigen shift and antigen drift. So if the virus has a slight change in its structure, then there would be partial erosion of the immunity. But if there is significant shift, that really reinitiates the pandemic. So that's the difference between the antigen shift and the drift. If there is substantial amount of genomic change, then it's back to square one. And it's nobody can predict the probability, but it's not a statistical zero. There is a possibility if the virus is allowed free run in part of the world, somehow it can come back as a a malicious variant, that we start the circle all anew.
Right, right. Okay, final question here for you. Let's pick up on that. Let's say that despite our best efforts, there are pockets of the world where new variants are going to develop, and that's going to be a potential threat to areas that even join herd immunity. And then the other day, and I'm sure you read it, there was a piece that came out and said, well, you know, at some point at 6 months or something, it's possible for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine to start losing their potency. And so that opens up the idea of booster shots or another shot or whatever. Are we headed to a period, because of all these different factors, of we should just expect as consumers that we're going to be looking at some kind of annual, if not a booster shot for our existing vaccine, maybe another vaccine for a variant that doesn't exist right now?
That's a likelihood given the significant vaccine hesitancy and susceptibility that will remain. And also the fact that the global demand and supply equation is significantly disrupted. As you probably heard about Johnson & Johnson, they had manufacturing issues. Similarly, in India, they're having manufacturing issues about the AstraZeneca virus. And there is a vaccine nationalism that's hoarding the vaccines for their own personal use. For instance, Canada has 10 vaccines for its every person there, but they haven't achieved. They haven't traveled the last inch, which is to inject the medicine in somebody's shoulder. They have 10 vaccines per person. So the countries are hoarding, and the countries that don't have, and all of them have one common problem: the last inch isn't covered because the needle doesn't go in the shoulder. Those are logistical challenges, but the gap between eliminating the virus and maintaining immunity is about at least 6 months or longer. And if we can put our act together as the world, we can really get rid of the virus or substantially attenuate its maliciousness towards humanity. It could go from pandemic to endemic, where you have to get a booster shot every year or two. But let's make that the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario.
Wow, pandemic to endemic. There you go. Yeah. Well said, sir. All right. Thank you so much. Another great segment with Dr. Bridgebomby. Hope you have a good weekend, sir. You're going to do something fun?
Richard, I'm taking boards the fourth time in cardiology. We have to do that every 10 years.
Okay.
So I'll be studying. So.
All right. Well, good for you, sir. Dr. Bridgebomby, thank you, sir, and have a good weekend.
I can use some knowledge. So